Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Evolution of Ultra High Definition, sponsored by Technicolor with a featured speaker from Philips. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be saved, so if we don't get to answer you today, we may follow up via email. At the bottom of your screen is the multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget. Here you can find answers to common questions. Also, a copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take 1 minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. Also, an on-demand version of the webcast will be available about 1 day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I'd now like to turn the event over to Light Reading's Senior Editor, Test and Measurement Components, Brian Santo. Brian?
Good morning. I started watching TV a few years after color was introduced. More than 20 years later, I was fortunate to be among the first few thousand people to see high-def TV. The leap in resolution was truly exciting. Now, 20 years after that, and not so long ago, I was among the first 2,000 to see ultra-high definition. The transition from standard def to high def had trained me to be excited about the improvement in video imagery derived from greater resolution. The increase in resolution from HD to Ultra HD was similarly vast, and I wasn't all that impressed. And apparently I wasn't the only one who felt that. It turns out that because of the biology of the human eye, there are diminishing returns when it comes to improving video imagery by increasing resolution. It is better, yes, and it's clearly better in some controlled circumstances, but overall it's not that much better. But as resolutions were being pushed to 4K and 8K, display technology got better, and great strides had been made in digital image capture and manipulation. The next time I saw Ultra HD, it was after the industry came to understand that some of the most noticeable and impressive improvements with UHD video were with the range of brightness, the range of the color, the depth of the color, the trueness of the color. The images had become so much more vivid. The shorthand reference for all of these qualities is high dynamic range, or HDR. When I first saw Ultra HD with HDR, that was exciting. And apparently, I wasn't the only one who thought so. The people who make movies and films and videos are ecstatic about the palette of improvements available to them. For them, it's like me going from a box of 16 Crayolas to a 64 box. You can take things to a whole new level. Ultra HD with HDR presents a new set of complexities for the TV industry, however. After negotiating the transition from SD to HD, the industry is familiar with what it takes to deliver video with a resolution appropriate to the range of different display devices. But HDR makes the issue so much more complex. It's been a couple of years since the notion that HDR is going to be just as important as higher resolution UHD. And that's been long enough for the industry to devise ways to deal with these complexities. Today, we're pleased to have with us two speakers who have been living and breathing this stuff for several years each and know the subject inside and out. They are Josh Limor, Senior Director, Ecosystem and Technology Development at Technicolor, and Frédéric Guillanneuf, Head of HDR Business Development at Philips. Josh is going to go into the details of what UHD and HDR actually are, specifically what it is that video professionals are going to have to start dealing with. Frédéric is going to start talking about what the UHD and especially HDR are going to mean for the entire video production, distribution, and delivery chain. As Hannah said, at the end of the presentation, we expect to have time for some Q&A. Just enter a question at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end. It's now time to hear about UHD and HDR. I'd like to hand the microphone over to Josh Limor.
Thank you very much, Brian. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Brian rightfully pointed out, there's been evolutions of, as far as resolution in the marketplace that has taken place that has introduced a law of diminishing returns to the consumer market. As Brian was pointing out, consumers saw less and less of an impact when we went to 4K as compared to HD. So the industry has been working on what are the 5 key dimensions of video quality that are necessary and what makes up video. So now what you'll see on your screen is those 5 key different dimensions. We've traveled up the vertical one, increasing resolution. We started exploring what it means to increase temporal frame rate. Key areas that we've seen this increase take place are, for instance, in live broadcast sports. The increase in temporal resolution does give a better quality result. Some TVs have tried to mimic this by creating frame interpolation, but the only true way to get that good result as far as the motion is to create it natively during production. Color precision and bit depth will absolutely be important as we start to introduce key new colors as well as additional gradations of gray as we introduce high dynamic range. And the bottom 2 spokes are probably the most that the industry is focusing on currently, which is increasing the color gamut, the palette of colors that are available, and the dynamic range, the increase in contrast available in the image that gives you not just more color, but more bright and dark versions of those colors. So first I'd like to show you what we've been focused on for years. For years in creating content, we've been focused on high definition SDR. While it only more recently reached the home, this has been established since the 1990s, focusing on creating resolution that's in high definition, 24 to 30 frames per second. Standard dynamic range. Standard dynamic range is a newly coined term because we had to define something that we've currently had compared to what high dynamic range is, and I'll go into what those differences are in a little bit. A color space that's been limited to a 709 gamut, and 8-bit precision, which in certain circumstances introduced banding artifacts that become more apparent as we have more information we're presenting to the end user. In 2014, we started to see UHD standard dynamic range enter the marketplace. What this really focused on was an increase in resolution, moving up to that 4K or UHD resolution, and in most cases moving to a different compression spec called HEVC that introduced 10-bit for your color precision instead of the typical AVC 8-bit. But this was the impact that Brian was referring to that was kind of met with a lukewarm response by the marketplace. So the industry's been working on how do we advance it a step further. Here what we're focused on is Ultra HD Premium specification established by the UHD Alliance at CES in 2016. This introduces not just the better bit depth precision that we had from UHD and not just the additional resolution, but also the ability for that higher temporal frame rate, the ability for higher dynamic range content, and the ability for a wider color gamut. So what do these terms actually mean? Let's start with high dynamic range. If you look at the human visual system, it's capable of seeing over 16 stops of dynamic range. If you're not familiar with the term of stops, it is every stop is worth a doubling of light. It's a terminology used in exposure for any camera, whether it's digital, film, cinema, or still. So each stop that we increase actually allows for a doubling of light to the end user or to the end viewer. Looking at digital cinema cameras today, they acquire about 14 stops of dynamic range for the movie content that's being shot today. As that content goes through the grading process, we put in front of that content a screen or a projector. And the colorist who works on creating and shaping the look of the film will shape that 14 stops into the roughly 6 stops of dynamic range that the standards have offered to date. High dynamic range now unlocks the ability for the colorist to work in a wider color space and a wider set of dynamic range as well. So here, the colorist can now shape light differently to tell the same story. Being able to pay attention to this wider palette allows them to have new challenges, but also new potential. They can now make a different sunset feel that actually feels bright with a bright blue sky, instead of having to compromise and create a blue sky with a darker sunset or a bright white sky to give that impression of brightness. So here with dynamic range, they're able to focus on how do I tell my story in this new space. So HDR, or high dynamic range, is very much about the light and the shadow, the detail that you can pull out between your highest brights and your darkest darks in a screen. To date, we've been using a form of transformation to a display called gamma. What gamma does is basically stretches to the peak brightness of a display from the minimum brightness of a display. So when you create something that's in 6 stops of dynamic range and it goes to a display that is 10, it actually stretches out the content and decreases the amount of perceptible detail within the image. The goal with creating and mastering content in high dynamic range allows us to maintain that detail within the peak whites and the darkest darks. Now you can see into the shadows. Now you can see into the highlights and see detail in the images that you've never been able to see before. It is important that as we move to high dynamic range, we make sure that we create an open ecosystem that's available for all content types and all budgets. We don't want to create an ecosystem that's limited to the top tier. By doing that, we would slow down the adoption and slow down the impact and the benefit for the marketplace. So both Technicolor and Philips have been very focused on open standards approach, engaged with all of the different standards bodies to make sure that technology exists, that we can deploy this new content immediately, and focused on making sure that there are solutions for not just the major studios, but also for everyone who wants to create content. Every channel should be able to make content. Every user should be able to generate content in HDR. In addition to dynamic range, we talked about expanding the color gamut. What you'll see on the left is a diagram that includes the smaller triangle in the interior as a Rec. 709. This was the space of colors that we've had available to us to date. This is for the home video space. To date, the digital cinema space has been able to use a color gamut called P3. Just now, we're beginning to create televisions for the home that can actually accomplish colors outside of 709 and in this P3 space. So in addition to the move to create more dynamic range, we also want to create the ability to use and take advantage of these colors that are outside of 709. So the industry is moving towards being able to create in this P3 color space. It's important to note also Rec. 2020. The reason for Rec. 2020 is it's a color space beyond what a television in the home can receive or can display. By creating a color space that's greater than what the TV can actually display and containing the colors within there, we can ensure that going forward as advancements in technology continue to move forward, we can create new colors. We can create spaces outside of P3. But the importance here is that when you create content, you have to create to 100% of something you see. So creating content in Rec. 2020 today is basically impossible. By that, what I mean is there are some projectors in the theater that are capable of color spaces close to Rec. 2020, but we don't yet have a technology in the marketplace that allows us to see 100% of Rec. 2020. We do, however, have technology that allows us to see 100% of P3. This technology allows us to now create content and ensure that it looks correct on a display device that's capable of that same color space. So now you can see how we approach the ability to create an open standard target that everyone can grade to. I keep mentioning the word standards because standards are extremely important in moving forward any ecosystem. 3 different bodies primarily are focused on how do we deal with these standards. There are several more, but these are the 3 that I'm going to focus on today. SMPTE is defined as a baseline standard for high dynamic range, a certain EOTF, that transfer function. So now instead of producing content in gamma, SMPTE recommends that for movie content, you master in a new space, which is PQ, or perceptual quantization. This curve more accurately mimics what the human eye can see and allows you to ensure that a certain measurement of light is represented in the signal, as opposed to a gamma signal, which would stretch to the ability of the display itself. In addition to mapping to the actual luminance measurement itself, we also introduce something called SMPTE 2086. SMPTE 2086 is mastering display metadata, because as you can imagine, as we master new content, which is different than what we've done for generations, we need a way to describe to the TV how this new content was made. So SMPTE 2086 includes the mastering primaries of the display that you would use. So in the case where you would be creating to 100% of D65P3, it would include the P3 primaries, and it also includes the white point. So as D65, it would include the coordinates for that white point as well. In addition to these key areas, you also want to tell the display what the peak luminance of your mastering display was, as well as the minimum luminance. So SMPTE 2086 carries all of this information to the back-end device. In addition to this baseline, there's been discussions about how do you define a display that is compatible with the signal that we would send to it, and how do you define a display that actually can represent the signal as it was intended to be viewed. These are 2 very different concepts. The CTA is focused on interoperability of that signal. What I mean is, if I have a high dynamic range signal, but my display is not physically capable of showing it, but my processing can read it and play it back in some form, I need to be able to define this as HDR compatible. So the CTA has come up with a definition of this display can read this signal. It does not mean that this display shows it to the best of its ability, but it does mean that it can read the signal. This program from the CTA does not contain a logo, is not externally focused for the consumer, is mostly focused on the industry for intercompatibility between displays. The UHD Alliance, formed in 2015, is a group made up of several different companies, and I'll get to the slide describing what the UHD Alliance is comprised of in a little bit. But the UHD Alliance focus was slightly different. Their main focus was to define what would be a more accurate display of this Ultra HD Premium content that includes HDR. So the group got together and focused on developing a specification to ensure that devices could have a logo that the consumer base could understand and see as something that would present them with the best high dynamic range experience possible. This group is comprised of many different companies across the entire ecosystem, 10 founding members, of which Technicolor is one. The goal here to be able to establish what it means for high dynamic range content to be created, to be distributed, and to be received by a display that can actually display it as it was intended to be viewed. The group released at CES this year 2 different display specifications. The reason there are 2 different display specifications is because one focuses on a higher brightness, while the other one focuses on a much more impactful local contrast. What you'll notice here is something that we touched on earlier, which is the impact of high dynamic range isn't solely about brightness. It is very much, as defined by this group, focused on contrast. This isn't necessarily the dynamic contrast as we've come to know it on displays, which is the other reason for the logo program. This is more primarily focused on what does it mean to show something that has a local contrast that's impactful enough to show an increased perceived depth and sharpness to the consumer. So I'm going to focus on what does it mean to create the content that is focused on by this open standard, by this group of companies that has come together to create this open specification and target for content. As we look at the ecosystem, we realize that there are different introduction rates for each different type of content. As we look at what everyone is focused on right now for creating high dynamic range content, there is a strong focus on movie and television content for the home. This is previously mastered content, and it has just started to come into the marketplace. Following that, as we already know, there are several companies focused on testing what does it mean to do live events and sports within a high dynamic range space. What are the different constraints that this type of production has versus a offline movie production? We all know that live events and sports is a major driver for linear television. And for that reason, this will be a major turning point for the adoption of HDR. Once sports are available in high dynamic range, it's believed that quickly following that, you will have the introduction of premium content from premium network distributors. And then towards the end of 2017, due to an introduction of a new ATSC specification, we see basic channels also starting to exist in high dynamic range. This slide is completely a prediction. Don't hold us to these numbers, but this is kind of the trend that we're seeing right now happen in the marketplace. So I touched on movie content, and I said that it's already starting to come out into the marketplace. So the Ultra HD Premium logo that the UHD Alliance has specified includes a specification for content. So we're starting to see Ultra HD Premium content roll into the marketplace already. Some examples of locations rolling out HDR content that fit this model include Amazon on their Prime Instant Video service. Amazon Originals are being generated in HDR. Technicolor as one of the, or I guess as the leading post-production facility in the world, has actually been generating the majority of the Amazon content together with our partner Amazon. MGO has also started to release HDR movies into the marketplace on their transactional service. These movies are primarily from Fox, but other studios are rolling out as well. And then the Ultra HD Blu-ray specification has been announced, and these Blu-rays with HDR are also starting to roll into the marketplace. So next, like I said, live events and sports will be coming. These are currently in the testing phase. So what does it mean to create high dynamic range content? Well, let's look at a reference display. On the left, what you'll see is a standard dynamic range reference screen that we've had to date. This was that specification established in 1990, which allows for a local contrast of roughly 1,000 to 1, 100 nit peak luminance, a black level of 0.1 nits, color gamut of 709, D65 white point. But the main focus here was open. Everyone should be able to create content, should be able to create it to a reference screen that can be properly calibrated, and this allowed our ecosystem to flourish and grow. Now, as we enter the world of HDR, there are two, I'd say, primary high dynamic range displays in the marketplace. One from Dolby and one from Sony. Dolby has created a proprietary pulsar monitor which is capable of achieving 4,000 nits peak luminance. This brightness comes at a cost because it has to use an LCD panel, and therefore their black level doesn't go as dark as an OLED panel. The goal here was to create movies that can reach a peak luminance that is far more than what somebody might want to see on a screen, and be able to present that as a signal down to the home. This also includes 100% coverage of the P3 space that we discussed, and it is available for Dolby-sponsored projects with studio partners. Next, the Sony X300 is also in the marketplace. This has a lower peak luminance of 1,000 nits, but the benefit of using this OLED technology is the black level. Because this display has OLED technology, it has the best local contrast of any display technology in the marketplace. This allows the colorist to focus on creating content that has the highest dynamic range possible. This content is being created, or does exist as what is specified by the UHD Alliance, and it's being created on a monitor that can be bought by anyone. It is a little pricey, but it is something that is generally available to the marketplace and comes with no restrictions for anyone to create content. So what is the workflow when you actually use these displays? First, let's look at it, and this is a terrible oversimplification of what all of this content means, but it is, or what creating this content means, but it is a great way for you to see the differences between creating SDR and HDR content. So what you're looking at now on this slide is, on the top, movie content. In movie content, we capture to that camera that has roughly 14 stops of dynamic range. We grade that content in a post-production facility on a grading tool like Resolve or Luster to a reference SDR screen. So we look at that screen, the colorist creates the content and masters that file. Once that content is created to that screen, it's rendered out and you have your SDR content. Television SDR cameras function a little bit differently. They actually capture already limited into an SDR space. The reason for this is to help speed up production. And the benefit is that in a live production, a video shader can enter and create and shape the light directly within the camera to that end signal as it's desired to be. So here, we're creating directly the SDR content, but we don't have that increased dynamic range to work with within the television space. What does it mean if we change this to the high dynamic range space? Well, really all that changes fundamentally is your reference screen. If you change your reference screen and you create from that same cinema camera that captured 14 stops, you can now grade with your normal basic tools to an HDR reference screen and create an HDR master open file. So not much changes as far as the workflow, a lot changes as far as the perception and what you're actually seeing on the screen. And you will make different creative choices and shape the light differently and the colors differently based on this new display. In television, slightly more changes. Because in television, as you remember from what I said on the last slide, we were limited to SDR cameras. We only had a limited dynamic range in the cameras that were available in live broadcast. So in television, new high dynamic range cameras are being made. These new high dynamic range cameras must maintain all of the video shading capabilities that were in previous devices, but now can include the advantages that the cinema cameras had before. But this also can become very expensive. If I am a broadcaster and I just started working with 4K content, 4K cameras, or even if I just started working with high definition cameras, being presented with the prospect of now having to replace all of my equipment, my infrastructure, and my personnel becomes very costly. In addition, I can't really run this production twice. So what does this mean? It likely means that as we enter HDR, there will be the need with movie content to upconvert legacy content. So many millions of hours of SDR content exist already and are in libraries and vaults with studios. This content will need to be remastered for high dynamic range displays. It will have to be presented correctly in this new space. So that will likely take place, and different technology, including technology from Technicolor, exists with this upconversion to allow for this upconversion to happen. Technicolor's technology is called ITM, or Intelligent Tone Management. There are other pieces out there as well that will allow for this upconversion. Similarly, in the television space, it's likely that, and several broadcasters have expressed, they can't replace all of the equipment that they've used to date. So there will be a need to upconvert standard dynamic range cameras and use choice locations for this brand new high dynamic range acquisition device. Once we figure out how to capture in high dynamic range or remaster to high dynamic range, then it's very important to figure out how do we distribute this? How do we get this to the home and ensure that, especially within live production, we don't have to do that production in both HDR and SDR simultaneously. We know it's hard enough to create one production. We don't want to have to get into a world where we have to create two in real time simultaneously. So if we're talking about distribution, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Frédéric, to take over the next piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. So as Brian mentioned, I am part of Philips, and historically, Philips has been focusing on the consumer electronics part. And basically, that's the reason why I will speak about bringing the signal to the home and the challenges that are associated with it. So if you look to the next slide, the challenges of the content and the devices. Bringing the content to the devices, that's the challenge. So the issue that we have now with the cameras, all those cameras that are coming, that are able to capture high dynamic range, that are going to be mixed with existing legacy cameras that are there already, the different type of movies that are mainly SDR at this moment, and the new movies that are going to come to HDR. Basically, you start to realize that there is a big challenge on the content side. Then basically on you will have to be able to, in one way or another, make sure that all these different types of contents are coming to the home. So that's the first part of it. The second part of the challenge is at home, at the home itself. How do we handle? Because basically you have all these TV sets that are already SDR in the field, and that are legacy TVs that you want to be able to address, and you have HDR TVs, new HDR TVs that are coming, and basically you have all these different type of transmission channels that we speak of OTT and broadcast that are, for example, very different types of channels. OTT is bringing point-to-point, so basically one file to a specific device. But broadcast is sending signals to the whole population, and basically these are different types of channels that also have their constraints. So how do we address these challenges with the introduction of HDR? That's a little bit the difficulty of the topic. So if you look at the success that HDR has had today, basically mainly at CES 2016, you can have a look at the people who have shown HDR TV set or introduced any HDR type of device, and basically you will see that everybody is looking into this direction for the reasons that Josh mentioned. Basically, HDR is beautiful. HDR is catching the eye. HDR is able to be convincing, especially for the people in the shops buying those TV sets, or for the operators, the people buying the services. So you can see that all these people and many more have introduced TV sets, and basically the whole industry is very, very active at this moment to work on this HDR topic. So this is really important, a burning topic that is starting to that we see, and you know, big research companies like AHS and CEA, they have already anticipated that in 2019 you will have about if you look at just China and North America, you will have already 20 million HDR TV sets coming over. So basically, this is a huge amount of TV sets, and you will have to make sure that content is following and that services are available for these TV sets. So if you consider just China, out of 63 million, then you will have 40 million which will be UHD, and 13 million which will be HDR. So this 30 million will be mainly from this UHD population, and that's a very important number. So China is going to be, even as you see, quite even more important in terms of penetration of the HDR feature than North America, which is expected to be at the level of 6 million in 2019. So let's come back to our original challenges. Basically, we have all these HDR TV sets in the field right now, and the broadcast people will have to are already at this moment selling their services in SDR. What is going to change for them, or what is going to change for the industry to bring this HDR signal now to the TV sets? And this is here something that has created this nice cooperation that we have announced at CES between Philips and Technicolor, because we have been looking at exactly the same type of I would say need of the market, and the need of the market is the compatibility with the SDR TV sets that are available on the market. You have seen on the previous slide that you have 4K TVs. You have much more 4K TVs that will be SDR than HDR ones, and especially at the beginning, basically all 4K TVs are SDR. You start to see some HDR TV sets coming, but this is really very, very minor. So this is the reason why 17 companies have already confirmed that they want to see the signal that is going to be transmitted for HDR services has to be read and directly compatible with this with the SDR TVs already in the field. And you can see that these are mainly operators and broadcasters that are very much interested in this feature. Talking about DirecTV, AT&T, Tata Sky, BBC, the NHK. All these guys want to make sure that their broadcast is going to be read by their current customers. So now, how do we do that? How do we make sure that the SDR TVs will be able to read this HDR stream? So the idea that we have developed, both Philips and Technicolor, is to send actually the HDR information on an SDR stream. So if you look at the delivery that we have chosen, the delivery mechanism will be a single stream distribution with some information, which we call metadata, which is going to be part of the stream. And the SDR stream will be, so if you look at the SDR TV sets or the SDR set-top boxes, they will be able to directly receive the information, and they don't know that there are metadata in the stream. So they are ignoring those metadata, and these guys are able to render directly the SDR stream like they are doing currently, means without any problem, they just directly interface with it. So if you look at the HDR TV sets and the HDR set-top boxes, these guys, they are new and they are enabled, and they know that some information is there in the stream for HDR reconstruction. And they have some processing in place that will use those metadata, part of the stream, and will reconstruct the signal to create a beautiful HDR image. And but the content has to come from somewhere. And here you will recognize basically all the different types of contents, the live broadcasts, the movies that will need to be sent to the channel. And for the live broadcast, basically you will have those HDR cameras and SDR cameras that, for example, for when shooting a football match, you will have some HDR cameras and mainly SDR cameras at the beginning, because these equipments are quite expensive and the broadcasters will not suddenly change all the cameras at the same time. So you will have the possibility to get those signals, I would say, in the production truck. The HDR camera will be a direct HDR signal. The SDR camera will be up-converted to an HDR signal. And the SDR movies is going to be up-converted to HDR signal. And the HDR content will be direct. And all these are going to be normalized on the one HDR stream. And I would say at the playout, there will be a conversion of this HDR stream into the SDR stream that is distributed. So that is actually the ideal type of chain that you would like to have. And the reason for that is that you want it to be basically backwards compatible, like we've seen earlier, but you also want the infrastructure of the broadcasters not to be changed too much. So basically, you do not want a lot of bandwidth addition. So this metadata would be a very nice way to have a very, very small increase of bandwidth and have an SDR compatible signal. So now we have looked at this distribution chain. What's happening in the home? In the home, basically, you will get all these signals transmitted, and you will have a wealth of different TV sets. And the TV sets will be so at this moment it's almost only SDR, but very soon you will have all types of HDR TV sets. And you will start by the 1000 nits HDR TV set. We'll go to 4000 nits HDR TV sets, for example. And all these TVs are going to coexist. And they want to see the most beautiful image. And that's a very, very important challenge, because the reconstruction of the signal is not like it used to be means only to an SDR TV would be just reconstructed for a type of luminance which is very similar to SDR. No, now the luminance is going to be very, very different. So the processing needs to take into account these differences, and that's the challenge, is to make sure that the signal coming, all the signals coming, so basically it's not going to be only the SDR plus HDR metadata, but broadcasters will be able to send just pure SDR, or will be able to send HDR10. If we talk about Blu-ray, for example, the Blu-ray is going to deliver HDR10 to the TV set. So this is all these types of contents will have to be taken into account by the TV. So now, how to get the best image quality, the best image for the TVs? The right way basically is to make conversions, and the best quality conversion will be an informed conversion. So basically, if the metadata will contain the information of the HDR image, those metadata will enable the reconstruction to exactly fit the dynamic range of the final display. So we will be able to reconstruct the signal and adapt it exactly to the type of display that you have, be it by the way set-top box or in the TV set. For the HDR10 signal, if you get a Blu-ray disc, for example, then you will have to adapt to the display, because you know that the signal will be in the range of 1,000 nits, and you will have to be able to map it to the capabilities of your display. So if your display is lower, then you will have to down convert it. Okay, if your display is higher, you will have to up convert it. So this is going to be a blind conversion, because the HDR10 information does not have the metadata. But the quality of this kind of mapping is going to be, the best we can have. It's going to be a kind of best effort quality. Well, if you go to the SDR plus HDR metadata type of transmission that I mentioned in the earlier slides, basically here you will be able to do a guided reconstruction. You will be able to use those metadata and with the help of functions reconstruct the final HDR image exactly in line with what the original intent of the artist was. So all the work that has been done at the grading in the grading room by the movie studios, for example, to prepare their movie for transmission, basically will be able to be reconstructed in the home, even though an SDR signal has been transmitted. The last part, of course, is for SDR. So basically here, it will be, if it's an HDR TV, the only way that you will have to do a blind reconstruction. And the blind reconstruction is, Josh mentioned it, is the ITM part of ITM features that Technicolor is proposing at this moment. Okay, so now for the SDR part, the desire is to get simply HDR content available to SDR customers. So basically, it's going to be a simple, very, very simple, with this backwards compatible way of transmitting the information, because the SDR will be, of course, direct and without any modification. but the SDR plus the HDR stream is going to be also directly seen by the TV because it's backwards compatible. So the last part, the HDR10, coming from the Blu-ray, the HDR10 information is not going to be read by the SDR TV or by the SDR set-top box. It's not going to be able to read that. So basically, what does it mean? It's not that bad because HDR10 has been created by the Blu-ray Disc Association in such a way that there is going to be always two streams. One, for example, one disc will be HDR, one disc will be SDR. So because the movies will be sold basically with those two discs, the HDR10 will not be compatible and will not be seen. So basically, you just use the SDR. And it's the same for OTT, for example. If OTT operators want to send an HDR10 service, they will always have an SDR service next to it. And for them, it's just also point-to-point. So basically, HDR10 will never be seen by an SDR TV. So there's the reason why, basically, here, with the SDR-compatible technology, you will be able to address the whole market, or broadcasters will be able to address the whole market, including HDR TVs and SDR TVs. So we have seen what was the ideal type of transmission channel and system to bring the HDR signal to the home. And in this last slide, you see that we are presenting the Technicolor Advanced HDR Solutions, which is basically the answer to this desire of an ideal system, and which has the features that we have seen previously. Basically, I can mention them again. And on the content part, you have the ITM of Technicolor, which is doing the upconversion from the SDR to the HDR signal. The HDR content will be direct. The HDR camera will be direct, through the HDR production truck, of course. And the SDR camera will be upconverted to an HDR signal. So basically, coming to the playout server is going to be an HDR signal. And in this server, you will have the encoder will do this transformation of generating this metadata and going from HDR to SDR. The SDR signal is going to be transmitted and reconstructed in the TV by the premium HDR decode. So it's not encoder, it's a decoder. So the HDR TVs will be able to decode this premium HDR, and we will have the ITM SoC, which will be able to do the blind upconversion from SDR to HDR. You will have the display tuning function, which will exactly use the metadata and adapt to the TV set that you have. And then you will have the white color gamut system that is going to adapt to make the right conversion of the color gamut and to adapt the gamut to the gamut of the display. So this solution basically is starting to be available. Already we have a lot of SoCs available having the decoding processing on board, and already being sold to TV set makers and to set-top box makers. The SDK of this technology is going to be available in May, so it's really next month. And don't hesitate to come over at NAB to see our demo. We'll be on the Technicolor booth, which will be at the Renaissance Hotel. Well, okay, in conclusion, basically, the HDR problem is the HDR challenge. We have seen that it's difficult to bring all these different signals to the TVs and to have a beautiful image. Basically, in this presentation, we showed that those challenges are overcome with a single stream, single layer HDR compatible technology that we have developed, that Philips and Technicolor have developed, that is going to get to your TV the highest possible quality, whatever the type of TVs that you have, and which enables you to watch, which is going to enable the consumer to get the best possible experience. And I think that Philips and Technicolor will be very successful and already starting to see a lot of success on the market at this moment. Okay.
Excellent.
Ryan?
Thank you. Thank you, Frédéric. We do have a few short minutes for a question and answer session. We do have so basically our hosts this evening, Technicolor and Philips, will get a report that will include all of your questions. They will have the opportunity to get back to you after this webinar, if they choose, to answer any of your questions that we won't be able to get to today because we do have such a short amount of time for a question and answer period. Because it's short, I'm going to just run into the first few questions that we can. One of which is a question about the bandwidth required. I think Frédéric mentioned that there might be some small increase in the bandwidth required to stream these. Is it that much more for an HDR movie, and how about for an HDR10 movie?
So basically, in terms of bandwidth, we are talking of 130 bytes per frame at the maximum. So it's going to be mainly changing scene per scene. So it's the amount of metadata transmitted is not very often going to change from frame to frame. So so you can imagine that you have to divide 135 bytes per the number of frames in the scene to get the kind of additional bandwidth that's needed. So it's really going to be negligible, and all broadcasters are able to handle that. So that's, and for HDR10, so HDR10 does not have additional metadata. So basically, HDR10 is just an HDR signal that is going to be transmitted.
Excellent. And I've the figure of merit I've heard is that you'd ordinarily for an HD a UHD signal, you'd want to devote 12 to 15 megabits per second. Is that correct?
Yeah. That depends on the type of encoder that you're having and the types of signal that you're transmitting. But yes, 15, 20 megabits per second.
So Brian, this is Josh. Let me add to that. So in the marketplace, we've been seeing a range, obviously, as we look at different profiles that have to exist for adaptive streaming profiles. For UHD resolution, we've been seeing in UHD plus HDR anywhere from 12 megabits all the way up to 25 or even 35 megabits per second. It really depends on who the distributor is and what their quality threshold is for any potential compression artifacts in general.
But if we see, you had mentioned earlier that Amazon is very interested in this. I imagine, and we know that that Netflix has talked about delivering 4K TV, 4K streams. You can do this with 12 to 15, 12 to 20, and as Frédéric said, the premium in terms of bandwidth is going to be negligible. It's going to be more or less the same as handling a 4K or HD stream, right?
Correct. Yeah. For distributing a single layer backwards compatible solution, as we're talking about here, instead of having to duplicate your UHD SDR stream and your UHD HDR stream, you'd be able to have a few bytes that effectively describe the difference between the two and be able to send one signal back to the back-end device that is directly backwards compatible and has the metadata to reconstruct back to the original HDR image.
Excellent, thank you. And next question. We're going a little bit over. We'll take a couple more minutes for a question or two more, and then we will have to wrap. Oh, there's a question about displays. Earlier on, we talked about the Dolby and Sony displays that are available. There are also the questioner mentions LG OLEDs. Samsung has some displays. The question is how some of these other displays that are available rate versus the Sony monitor and the Dolby monitor you mentioned earlier.
Sure. It's a great question. So the monitors that were mentioned earlier were professional displays, targets for grading content. An LG monitor or a Samsung monitor are consumer displays. So you can imagine that to create a consumer device that's affordable for a consumer marketplace, they do make some compromises as far as what the quality of that end consumer device would be. So when we create content, we have to target premium professional devices so we can make the best possible content. And then as it gets to the display, you'll have different benefits. So where in the slide I mentioned the UHD Premium logo, that is for consumer displays so that the consumer can see what would represent the originally mastered professional display content as best as a consumer display could.
Excellent, thank you. Again, I'll just jump straight over to the next question. So we've been working with an 8-bit color depth. When we're talking about HDR recently, we've been talking about a 10-bit color depth. The question is about 12-bit color depth. Is there an advantage to going to 12 bits, and what might it be if there is?
So there definitely is. I mean, anything you increase can always have a benefit as far as what the distribution is. Our distribution is compatible with both. One of the biggest difficulties with distribution is ensuring that you have a chipset on the back end that can actually decode the proper bit depth precision, as well as a distributor with all of their test equipment that can actually support it. So right now, if we look at an HEVC compression specification, it's targeting 10 bits. To do 12-bit, it would have to be some different type of encoding, potentially a dual-layer approach that would require 2 video decoders on the back-end device, which would be more costly for a back-end device to actually build. So for that reason, as far as for distribution, the market seems to be coalescing around 10 bits within HDR. As far as mastering content, today we master content usually to a 16-bit precision when we create the content. Even in SDR, we're mastering to a 10 or a 16-bit precision. So going down to 8 or going down to 10 is still being sampled from a much higher bit depth master.
Excellent. We have run out of time. I want to thank our panelists and sponsors here today. Josh Limor, Senior Director, Ecosystem and Technology Development at Technicolor. Frédéric Guillanneuf, the Head of HDR Business Development at Philips. My name is Brian Santo. I'm the Senior Editor at Light Reading. I want to thank those of you who hung with us for the whole time for appearing here with us. We have got a survey coming up. If you are willing to just take a moment to let us know what you thought about this presentation. We would be very, very grateful. Once again, Josh, Frédéric, thank you, and everyone, please have a great day.
Thank you.